Okay, well, welcome everyone. Today I'm going to be interviewing Lubaina Choudhury. And I just want to quickly say I met Lubaina like 4 years ago, I think, in one of our meditation.
Longer.
Remember, you used to come with Frank to our
Yeah,
meditation
I
sits?
think that was 7 years ago.
Oh my God, that was 7 years ago. Yeah. And I've always been, very intrigued by your journey, like your shamanic, your yogic, your Ayurvedic, like I don't know. I think you've studied everything. And I love that you're from India, you're Indian. And so, it's really cool to connect with other like-minded South Asian women. So I wanted to get on this call today to discuss what to expect in 2022 in terms of astrology, in terms of our love lives specifically.
Yeah.
And also, if you could just give us an overview of what someone should expect when they go get an astrology reading. I get this all the time from my clients. Okay.
Sure. Yeah,
But I want to first read out your bio.
sure. Go for it.
Okay. So, Lubaina is a whole self healing practitioner, which means that she helps her clients connect to the deeper essence of who they are spiritually, creating the space for healing to happen. Her mission is to empower you to not only live a life of passion, joy, and fulfillment through overcoming your fears of not enoughness and overwhelm and self sabotage. She specializes in a healing modality called movements of light that works with your body and consciousness to help you gain access to the deeper realms from which your reality manifests. Ooh. I'm I'm sorry. She is also an astrologer and yoga teacher, and she loves to use these tools in combination with sound to facilitate the healing process. She works with her clients one-on-one as well as in groups where she teaches what she does. She has an extensive background in teaching and healing that's come through years of self exploration, learning from her teachers who appeared at exactly the right times in her journey without her looking for them, and her clients and students who continue to teach her every day. So I'll be sending her info out after this call. So I'm so honored and excited to connect with you today,
Yeah,
Lubaina.
yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're first going to interview Lubaina. I have a couple of questions. And then if you have any questions at the end, you can feel free to put them in the chat, or in between, if you have questions, feel free to add them to the chat and we can get to them either during the session or afterwards. Okay. So first, Lubaina, I just want to quickly, if you could just, I don't know, 3-minute version of your journey, 5-minute version of your journey. I know that's very
Yeah,
condensed,
yeah.
but
No, no, I can do
what
it.
kind of got you doing what you do today?
Yeah, totally. So I'll dive right in, and actually, I'll talk a little bit because we had mentioned I'll talk about my background. So I always say I don't know where I'm from because my grandparents were born in India because it was all one country at that point. My
Mhm.
parents were born in East Pakistan,
Mhm.
and I was born in Bangladesh. But
Mhm.
you know, to me, it seems like an oxymoron because we're all from kind of the same region, you know.
Mhm.
And then we have my mom was actually born in Kashmir, so she was born kind of on the border of India and
Wow.
Pakistan, and she grew up there too. So it's like kind of a nice hodgepodge mixture of things. But I did grow up in Bangladesh. I
Mhm.
was there for 21 years. And basically, what got me started on my journey was astrology. So, when I was 8 years old, my cousin came over and gave me a book by Linda Goodman, and we read
Mhm.
it together. And that was it. And really, I taught myself. It was just something, I believe it's from past lives, you know. It was part of my life before for sure, because it was something I just got into when I was a kid and never looked back. It's always been a part of my journey. And the other stuff that you mentioned, both in my bio and kind of, you know, that I've dabbled in a lot of things, that came about as a result of looking for healing for myself. So that's really been my journey, has been I've used this body, this mind as an experimentation as well as exploration, So, and I've been very lucky. I've been blessed with really amazing teachers, and I continue to learn from not just them, but also, as I said, from my clients and students, because I believe that the journey of learning is absolutely infinite. There's no end to it. But so just to wrap it up a little bit more, astrology. And then when I moved to New York, which was when I was 21, that was like almost 17 years ago, I went through a really bad depression because I had gone through divorce. I had moved halfway across the world, so there was a lot going on. And that's what got me into the path of healing. I met my shamanic teacher from Peru. I studied with him studied in the most experiential way. I guess there's no other way to say except studied, just put in the hours and the years for about 8-9 years, And I also met my healing work teacher through him. So they all came in a very synchronistic fashion, and it all happened in the moment that I needed it. So the healing that I was looking for, the universe provided. So now at this point in my journey, I'm working with all the tools that I've learned. My main tools are astrology and movements of light, which is the healing modality, which can be done both hands-on and distantly. And it uses the body as a portal for deeper layers of consciousness to access where we're holding our patterns, where we're holding our contractions and blocks, right? And the interesting thing is, a couple of years ago when I was working on somebody, I started feeling their charts in their bodies because I have this astrological background, right? So I was like, oh, this is like Venus over here. And it feels like Venus is getting kind of communicating with Saturn. So I'm feeling the planets and how they hold us in a field, so that's been really cool. That's something I'm kind of going deeper into and haven't really kind of talked a lot about because it's more happened in one-on-one sessions, not something I'm teaching quite yet, but one day. So that, I think, wraps up all of it. And throughout all of this, astrology has been, my best friend. And now I'm learning Vedic astrology because I'm a Western astrologer, even though I'm from that part of the world. So now I'm learning Vedic astrology. And it's funny because the person that I'm studying with, she looked at my chart and she was like, there's a lot going on here. And you have the chart for astrology, you have the chart for Ayurveda, you have the chart for shamanism. There's a lot going on here. And I was like, I guess it makes sense. So there we are. Here we are.
That is incredible. And I'll just say, I've been recently listening about the constellations and the galaxy and our solar system, and how like each of the planets in our solar system are a school and or different levels of consciousness of, of our whatever ascension or growth or lifetimes. I don't exactly know all of it, but I've been finding it intriguing that like different planets hold different personalities or different levels of integration or healing. And, for instance, Saturn is where all the lessons are learned. And then, in astrology, we learn about like the return of Saturn and how that impacts our lives in 7-year cycles, things like that. So there is such an impact of the stars and the planets on our bodies that hold us. I like how you said they hold us. And I love how you talked about how it's connected to your body. So I think that's really cool. So specifically in terms of one's love life, like what can one learn about by getting an astrology session done?
Totally. So I'm going to start with talking about, it's interesting you mentioned what you just did in terms of like the planets and their levels of consciousness. So I'll start there because I think a little bit of background will be helpful for people, especially if they're not familiar with the astrological language, right? So you can think of them as levels of consciousness, and you can also think of them and experience them as archetypes, right? So we have these planetary archetypes, and we have the asteroids that also hold certain archetypes, right? And then the interaction of the archetypes with each other, right? So in terms of the level of consciousness, there was this man called Edgar Cayce who used to be really famous. A lot of people still know him. You know, he was called the father of holistic medicine, the sleeping prophet. He talked about how our souls in between lifetimes on Earth would journey into these levels of consciousness or planetary realms where we would continue to learn. And then when we would come back on Earth, the reason our chart impacts us is because we're carrying those vibrations on a soul level in our energy bodies. So if you bring just a little bit of yoga into it, our astrological chart is basically a summation of all the karmic patterns that we're working with, because that's what this body is. It's karma, you know. And I know that sometimes people have like a negative connotation with karma, where we need to like get rid of our karma or break our karma. Not so much, you know. Karma is just patterns, it's cycles. That's what we work with in astrology: patterns and cycles. That's the nature of our lives, right? So in terms of your love life, there are several things to look at, you know, in a chart. The very first thing you want to look at is Venus, because Venus is the planet of love, you know, and you want to look at how the Venus is aspected, as in how it's communicating with other planets in the chart, where it is located in the chart in terms of houses. Like there are 12 houses, just like there are 12 zodiac signs, there are 12 houses in your chart. So you want to look at which part of your chart it's located in. And that's going to give you the first and basic information about how someone approaches relationships when it comes to love and intimacy, right? So that's the first level. Then you want to look at, there are certain houses you want to look at, depends on what about your love life you want to know. Do you want to know about partnerships? Then you look at the 7th house. Do you want to look at domestic life and how one would be in a marriage? You want to look at the 4th and 10th houses. Do you want to know how romantic somebody is? The 5th house, you know? So these are kind of the love houses, relationship houses in a chart. So we would look at how those charts are playing out in somebody's life. And we can go into your chart at some point to kind of give an example so people get really clear about how we do this. So does that answer the question?
I think that is so clear. I appreciate that, because I've always been curious about, you know, what is the basic layout? Why does it matter where the planets are? What's the significance of Venus? And now that I'm understanding that it's level of consciousness and kind of like the life lessons that you're here to learn.
Yeah,
absolutely. And that's kind of
absolutely.
what the houses represent.
Yeah.
That makes it so much more easy to understand, because it's like, otherwise you're doing all these pujas. I mean, in India, right? You're always doing,
totally.
you know, all these sacred ceremonies
Remedies.
to remedy. Oh my God, it's all about remedies. And for me, I found that those remedies don't necessarily work unless you're learning the lessons that come
Absolutely.
with them, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise you could be like just going to temple every day. I mean, that's what you do, right? In India. And so the other thing, if you could explain, like, what are cycles? How do, you know, like how do cycles fit into this?
How do cycles fit into this? Okay, so every planet has what's called a return, right? So everybody hears about the Saturn return because we've become, as we become more familiar with astrology, Saturn return being a very significant part of each person's life, it's gained popularity. Saturn also has a 7-year cycle, as you mentioned before. So similarly, each planet has a return, you know, so it's cyclical in that nature, right? And also, depending on your chart, there are, and this is valid in both Western and Vedic astrology, there's going to be periods in your life where certain things are going to take more importance and certain lessons are going to come up. It's almost inevitable, right? So the lessons are going to come up. The thing that's still in our control is how we learn them, how we choose to react to them, and what we do with them. That's what shapes everything, right? So the lessons come in cycles, and it depends. Again, it's like a very individual chart by chart thing right now, both in Western and Vedic astrology, I'm going through a particular Saturn cycle, right? In Vedic astrology, it's called Shani Sarisat, right? And it's supposed to be a time where you really, really come face to face and confront a lot of karma, you know? And depending on where your Saturn is, you learn those things in the hard way, or you learn them in the easy way, you know, and there's going to be an inclination, right? And then there's the person and what they're doing for their own evolution and growth, which makes a difference in how you react to the pattern, right? So yeah, and then of course we have the most obvious cycles, which is the solar cycle and the lunar cycle, right? Every month we watch the phases of the moon, and every month we also see how the sun changes the signs. So those are the two cycles that I think like is most obvious, and maybe we can understand their impact on us more easily, you know. And if you track it, you'll see you can actually break it down into the years. You can break it down into even months, down to the second. You know, it's really quite fascinating. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So can you just give me a little bit of an understanding of what is the relationship house? Is that the most important house to look at for love? Or you also mentioned like, I
Yeah,
forget, 9 and 12.
sure.
Right.
Yeah. So do you want me to use your chart as an
Yeah, let's
example?
do it.
All right. I think I can share my screen.
Yeah.
Pull up
I
your
might
chart here.
have to enable you multiple. Let me know if you can.
Okay, let's see. All right. Let's look at your chart. This is fun. This is like, oh, it says it's disabled. So I think
Okay. So I need to figure out how to enable you. So
you
it's
might have to
multiple
make me a
participants.
co-host.
Okay. So I'll go to participants. More. Make host. Allow. I'll just make you host.
Yeah, now I can share.
Okay.
So, yay. So this is what your chart looks like, right?
Okay.
So, like I said, there are certain houses in an astrological chart that are important for relationships. One of them is the fourth house. Now, different relationship houses represent different things, right? So the fourth house represents making a home. So you see the concentration of planets you have over here, right? So you have your sun there, that's the sun, you have your moon, you have Neptune, you have Mercury, all in the fourth house. So you have come in with the focus being one of your focuses, because that's not the only focus in your life, but one of the focuses is creating a home, creating a family, and having a domestic life, right? Like your domestic life is a big part of what you came here to do.
Wow, this is so cool.
That's your fourth
You know,
house.
honestly, I don't think I've ever had anyone explain this to me this way. And I love, yeah, that's
Yeah.
so cool. Or maybe I just didn't have the consciousness to understand it.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have the fifth house is romance, right? So you have
Okay.
Venus in the fifth house, which makes a
Wow.
natural romantic, you know?
That's amazing.
So you're
I
like,
thought I had Mars in my fifth house, or not Mars.
well,
Yeah, I thought I had Mars.
well, maybe the Vedic chart is going to look different for
Okay,
sure.
maybe
You know?
it's one of I thought it was one of my dominant planets, but no,
Well,
that's great.
let's make
Okay.
sure I have your birth information right,
Yes.
so that I always like to start
Yeah,
to.
no, you're right. You're right.
All right,
Yeah.
just making sure, because
I'm just I did this like 7 years ago, so it's
no
been a
worries.
long time.
Yeah, your Mars is actually in your first house, and
Yes, that much I've known. And
it's
Jupiter, maybe?
doing it's yeah, your Jupiter and Mars is in your
Yes.
first house. So interestingly, and just a side note, only because I'm geeking out right now.
Yeah.
But according to Edgar Casey, the way to look at which planets have the most significant or was the last visited planet before this life, you look at the angles in a chart. So the first angle is the first house, and you have Jupiter and Mars there, which would mean that those are likely to be planets that you had a little in-between excursion before this lifetime.
Oh, wow. I'll just say, I just heard this. I don't know if you know Gigi Young. She's like the psychic, and she talks about, she's lately been talking about, different planets and consciousness. And she was saying that the Martian planet is very like toxic masculine. That's what she was saying. Like it's evolved into,
I think we have,
very
I think,
masculine. Mhm.
well, I think we, we can't, Mars has been around long before toxic masculinity has been,
Mhm.
So Mars is really just the masculine archetype,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
It's also sexual energy. It's how we act, like how we take
Mhm.
action is Mars, right? So depending on how strong your Mars is, which your Mars is actually has a few aspects. It's not like extra strong. I would say the strongest planet in your chart, or one of the most influential planets, would be Jupiter, because you have so many planets in Sagittarius, right?
How do you see that?
So
I
you
don't
have your
know.
sun in Sagittarius, you have your moon in Sagittarius, you have Mercury in Sagittarius,
Okay.
and Neptune in Sagittarius. They're all ruled by Jupiter, which is on the cusp of your first house. This is all astrological
Oh,
lingo, right? So if
okay.
I were to look at it, I would say you're definitely a child of Jupiter.
Okay.
And then I would say Mars also has an effect because Mars is so close to Jupiter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, going back to love, we were
Mm-hmm.
looking at the fourth house is domesticity, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's creating a home, creating a family,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that kind of a thing. It's also connected to the mother. So it's
Mm.
like the lineage of the mother takes on more importance, especially because you have the moon there. That would be another planet that we would look at in terms of relationships, because the moon is our emotional nature. It's how
Mm.
it's really more subconscious, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the Vedic astrology, we use the moon as the basis
Mm-hmm.
for the chart, right? In the Western astrology, we use the sun, but the moon, regardless, is the more subconscious side of us, the more feminine side of us. At the same time, it has an importance because of our emotions in terms of love life, right? So
Mm.
you have the moon there. And so that tells me that there's a significance in terms of how you were raised, and especially the ancestral line from your mother would be a big influence on how you decided to shape, your family life, right? Then we're looking at Venus in the fifth house. Fifth house is about romance, right? So Venus there creates somebody who definitely needs love and romance, right? And we're looking at Venus making an aspect to Pluto. Venus is squaring Pluto, right?
Sorry, can you explain this little chart thing on the bottom?
This thing right here,
Yes.
these are aspects of
Okay.
this shows the interplanetary relationships,
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I know, it's all symbols and signs, but
I
that's why you
know.
have me to translate. So you have
Yes.
the fifth house, and you have a pretty potent Venus in the fifth house, right? It's making an aspect to Pluto, which makes like relationships kind of like a focal point, and also a point of transformation, because anything Pluto touches, it wants to transform. And
Wow. This is incredible.
so that's, in a nutshell, I would say
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're looking at in your
Mm-hmm.
chart in terms of
Mm-hmm.
love and romance. And then you have, this is your seventh house, which is the house of partnerships. You have Pisces on the seventh house. Again, a desire for love, a desire for connection, and even a desire for spiritual love, not just any old love, like a soulmate type of searching is what you're looking for. So those are the main houses in terms of relationships, love, and romance. And there are other houses, like the eighth house is all about sexuality, right? But, and this is interesting, right? Sexuality is not separate from transformation. It's not separate from our spirituality. It's also connected to our mysticism. It's connected to money. So Venus rules both love and money in astrology. So it's funny, right? Because we think of, I have one of my teachers said to me that sexual energy is the same as the energy of money, right? So it's like there is a deep connection between sharing of resources, because money is resources, it's energy, and so is sexual energy, the exchange of resources. So we would look at the eighth house for that. And the second house also has connection to money. So that would be another house that's going to play in, depending again on the individual, and what kind of relationship are they asking about? Are they just saying, how does it look like for my love life? Is a very blanket statement. Are you asking about serious relationships? Are you asking if you're going to start dating again? Are you asking if you're going to heal whatever trauma there is around being intimate with somebody? Like, what is the question? So depending on the question, we look at the chart. Yeah.
Wow, that's really, really potent. I appreciate it. And being in relationship with anything, right? Like that's what we're here to do, is heal our relationships with money, ourselves, partners, parents, et cetera, et cetera. And so understanding what life cycle you're in and how your planets are aspected on your chart. That's really interesting stuff. So I'm curious, like, what in here would indicate what I'm here to learn? Do you think do those planets in that house mean that that's also what I'm here to learn?
Absolutely.
Or are those my strong, is it like those are my strong cards, or are they what I'm here to learn?
We want to look at what Saturn is doing for lessons. That's like astrology 101. For what lessons we're here to learn, look at Saturn. And there's an asteroid called Chiron that we also
I've heard. Right? Yeah.
Chiron is the archetype of the wounded healer. So represents our core wounds, right? So it's where we hurt the most, but it's also where we have the most amount of healing potential that we can share with others. So your Saturn actually has a lot of aspects.
Where is my Saturn?
It's right here, this little guy over here.
Okay.
Saturn, right? And you see all those red lines. Red lines are quote unquote challenging aspects, right? So you see there's like a lot of, your Saturn is very stimulated in your chart, which
and it's in my first house.
It's in your first
what is the first house? Is it personality?
First house is yourself. Right?
Okay.
First house is you as the individual, your expression, and also what people first see when they encounter you. It's how you present yourself to the world. It's kind of like the outward facing.
So is that like I'm also like this wounded healer type of person?
Well, no, that's Chiron, right? We're looking at Saturn there, right? So first of all, when people look at you, they see somebody who's very Jupiterian, because Jupiter is the closest planet to your rising sign, right? So this is your rising sign right here, which is Virgo. So Jupiter is the closest there. So they see somebody who wants to share knowledge, because Jupiter is about sharing knowledge, right? And is pretty active about it, because we have Mars conjunct Jupiter. Conjunct means together. And so they see that's the first thing they encounter. Saturn is really almost in your second house. Not that it doesn't have an impact on your first house, because it is in your first house. It has the impact, but it's not as strong in your outward world, right? So it might be something you experience more on an internal level, right? Especially because we're looking at the aspects or the relationship of Saturn to the other planets being all these challenging aspects, right? So this is somebody who, if I were just looking at it and I didn't know you at all, I would say this is somebody who had to learn a lot from how they grew up. They had to fight the system, because Saturn represents authority.
Oh my God, that is so true.
Saturn also represents the masculine authority figures in our lives, starting with our fathers, because that's the first masculine authority figure that we encounter. And it's interesting because your Saturn does have a positive aspect to Venus, so it shows that there's genuine love there. But at the same time, the other harder aspects shows that there were certain things that were very difficult for you to swallow when it came to your relationship to your father, which led you to explore even more about what you would want when you create a family.
Wow.
So those would be that's like right off the bat, the Saturn, the lessons.
I should have come to you like 20 years ago, I wish. But you and I were like the same age. It would have been so fun to be friends at that time.
Yeah, totally. And and right now you're going through a Venus return, because Venus is in your your natal sign of Capricorn right now, and Venus is retrograde. And once we're done with your chart, I'm going to dive into the astrology of 2022 in terms of love life, right? So yeah, those are some of the lessons you're here to learn, and then Chiron being in the ninth house.
Can you show us where that is? There it is. Got it. Yeah, these symbols are so new.
I know. Yeah. So that's why you have somebody to translate, right?
That's why we need someone like you.
Well, I'm also going to be teaching a basic astrology course online.
Wow.
So
That's
stay tuned for that
exciting.
if you want to learn more.
Yeah. I'll share that with my community.
Totally. So Chiron being here in Taurus, right? It's a Chiron in Taurus in general, because I also have Chiron in Taurus, because we're in the same generation. So we're likely to have similar Chiron, because Chiron is.
You mean like we were born in similar years? That's why? Is it like the Chinese, like year of the ox, year of whatever?
Like Chiron is a slow moving asteroid. It stays signed for a bit. So to personalize Chiron, you have to look at what Chiron is doing in the rest of the chart, like what it's aspecting, what house it's in. It's in your ninth house, the ninth, and it's in Taurus. So that says there's some level of lessons to be learned about body image and being in the body and feeling good about your body, and some level of healing that needs to take place around that. The ninth house is also higher knowledge. The ninth house is also philosophies, religion. It also is foreigners and foreign cultures, so here you are, born in a foreign land. So that's another part of the chart that shows lessons to be learned, right? So does that answer your question?
Yes. And how does one, if let's say someone asks, like, is this a good year to meet someone, or when will I meet my partner and life partner? How does, if you could explain.
So I have an interesting viewpoint on that. So as I said, astrological influences are cyclical, right? So there are certain periods of our lives where there's just not enough focus on relationships in terms of the planetary influences that are affecting us, right? At that time, it might be that there's more focus on career, could be more focus on your health, could be just a different focus, right? So depending again on the individual, there are certain cycles where you get more open to relationships, right? Last year, when I got my chart read by one of my astrologer friends, right? He told me that I was very likely to be in partnership, very likely to meet somebody and have a significant relationship this year. There's only 4 days left. I have not had that experience, right? However, I did find myself in partnerships with people, and intimate partnerships, right? Not necessarily love, but it had to do with work, right? And I definitely became a lot more open to accepting and being curious about being in a relationship. So that's the shift that happened for me. It didn't necessarily translate into a relationship, right? So this is why when I do a reading, I don't like to say, well, you're definitely going to meet somebody. It looks like relationships on the cards, unless it's super strong. And that's just what intuitively comes in, because I don't just look at the chart and talk about the chart. I also kind of do the intuitive channeling as to what the planets are saying is likely, So I might say there's a strong possibility of you meeting somebody this year because there's Neptune going over your Venus. Like, it really depends. It's on the individual,
Right. And it's also up to the individual's intention and focus, right?
Absolutely.
Like, if you're not focused on dating and love, then it's less likely regardless, right? You might actually meet your partner, but you might miss them. There's just
so many factors.
Right.
And the other thing that can happen when we have, let's say, relationship stuff show up, it might be that, and we don't encounter somebody, it might be that we still have some healing to do,
Right.
And my healing work really is centered on helping people get to a point where, especially women, right? Because it just seems like women struggle with it a little bit more, right? Get to a point where you're okay without a relationship. Like, you don't need one. And then if you have one, it's really beautiful because you're not trying to get something out of it. You're not trying to fulfill yourself through the relationship. Your cup is already full, you know,
I
and
totally resonate with that.
then,
And the person's like an the person's like icing on your cake, you know?
exactly.
Yeah.
You know, adds flavor to your life, but it's
Yeah.
not
Some
like your life
masala.
yeah, exactly. But it's not like your life was flavorless, you know.
Right.
It's just they add their vibrancy,
Mhm.
but you're not taking something from them. You don't need their energy to make you feel like you're something or the other. And of course, like there's some people who are more inclined to look for relationships depending on their chart, you know. There are some people whose charts, like mine, my chart is kind of like all my planets are up here. And this is all about being out in the world. It's all about profession. It's all about doing stuff and being part of the outside world, right? So my focus in general is not really relationships, you know, in terms of my personal life, right? It's not relationships. However, because I do have a bunch of stuff in the eighth house, I learn a lot from relationships. That's why they're fun. You know, they've been like huge catalysts of transformation for me. And eighth house again is spirituality, transformation, growth, right? So that's where relationships come in. So it depends on the individual's chart as to what cycles they're going to experience and how they're going to respond to it. You know, maybe somebody who has, let's say, more fifth house planets, and they were under the aspects that I was under this year, they would have been more likely to get into a relationship because they're just more inclined towards that part of their life, you know?
Absolutely. This
Yeah.
is such great explanation of what, you know, it helps demystify what our human experience is, right?
Yeah.
Like, why are we stuck in a certain area? What do we still have left unresolved?
Mhm.
Because if you still have all these things unresolved, then there's, even if you do get into a relationship, you'll sabotage it,
Yeah,
right? Or
totally.
your self-doubt or your insecurities will come into play. And that's what we're here to learn, right? Is like through the self-mastery process is healing all these karmic patterns and learning more about ourselves, stepping into like, you know, becoming our own lover, becoming a better person, so
Absolutely.
that when we are getting into a relationship, it's there's like a healthy, like you're not
Yeah.
adding more karma to your chart, you know?
Exactly. They're helping you resolve your karma,
Right.
not adding more to it. And of
Right.
course, there are karmic relationships. So I'm gonna share the screen one more time.
Yeah.
And say something about like looking at partnership charts, right? So if we wanna know, because there are gonna be certain relationships that are more significant than others in our lives, right? And some might be brief, some might be longer. For longer relationships, we wanna know if there are Saturn contacts between the two charts, right?
I
As
see.
much karma as Saturn creates, Saturn also creates longevity. So it's very unlikely that you have any person in your life who's been there for a very long time, whether it's a friend or your husband, your spouse, um, or it's your parents that you don't have any Saturnian connection with, because Saturn is just like that. You know, Saturn creates the bond. You know, now they may be bonds that heal or they may be bonds that hurt. That is dependent on kind of what we've been through in the past and what we're learning now. Also, we would look at angles are another important part of relationship analysis, right? So if someone has a bunch of planets on, let's say, your fourth house, they're going to trigger the need for domestic settling down vibes, you know, because you feel really at home with them. If someone's on your seventh house, they're going to trigger like the desire for marriage. You idolize them. They seem like the ideal ideal person for you. Someone on your 10th house is going to be significant in your life, but they're more going to push you towards your career, you know. So like people's angles are important. There's a lot of different things to look at, but there are a few things that you can tell right off the bat that it's a significant relationship. And then we have the North Node, which represents our purpose in life, what we're here to learn. People who touch our North Node, no matter how short or long the relationship, whether they touch our north or south node, because there's both. There are lunar nodes, right? So there's a north node, which is what we're here to learn, our purpose this lifetime. And the south node is what we've already mastered, right? So people who touch these points are always going to be significant, no matter what, even if they come for just a brief period of time, because they stimulate our karmic patterns. Again, this is all like one big karmic picture. Kind of gives you an overview of what to work with. And I like to take it even a little deeper. So we're not just looking at it from a point of view of, well, my Venus is here, my Saturn is there, so it makes me like this. That's the personality. That's one layer. But then there's the archetypal energy of like, well, the fourth house represents home, right? What does home mean? On a really deep level, home means going home, right? Leaving, like experiencing liberation, experiencing moksha, which we're all searching for. So on a really, really deep level, it's not just about creating a home, it's also experiencing that. So yeah, that's there are many layers is what I'm trying to say.
Wow, this is so interesting and so powerful. And I can imagine like having charts done with a potential business partner or like any significant
anything without that.
Right. I'm not, and this is not even anything I would have considered. I haven't even looked at my husband's chart in comparison with mine. Do you superimpose the charts or do you just compare them side by side?
There's a couple of relationship charts. There's like I'll show you what a partnership chart looks like, right? So I'll just put myself in there.
Sure. Yeah. Be interested to see.
Just to give you, this is sorry, I've had this database since I was 16 years old. So there's a lot of people in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is one way. This is basically comparing the two charts. There's one on the inside, one on the outside. So you get to see the interaction between them. Then there's a midpoint method where you combine the charts. That's more of gonna give you a flavor of what the relationship itself is like.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And I can imagine how helpful it is as a parent, to understand your relationship with your children, what
totally
karmic lessons you're here.
For sure. You want to wait to do a child's chart only because like that's, it's a little tricky to read someone's chart before they're fully kind of formed. But,
you mean as like before they're born or after they're born?
No, after they're born, you want to wait a few years because you want to make sure like you're not projecting onto your child what you see in their.
Oh, I know. It's so scary to do that, right?
Yeah,
just like,
but we do. It's unconscious, So there's, I think in Vedic astrology too, but in Western astrology, I was taught like you should not read before at least there's 7. You can look at certain things, but like not analyze in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. Some things yes, but some things no. So yeah, like, and again, like just because you have a chart doesn't mean it's going to be realized, right? There's that fun kind of roll of the dice, right? Where you come in. I know some people who have like amazing charts and they haven't really realized that potential. It depends on how you handle your karma. Maybe you come in and then you change your mind about what you're here to learn. We don't know what the inner workings of the soul is, right? So we want to stay kind of relaxed about it as we kind of learn more and more. People get really into it, and then they start creating attachments and identifications.
Right. You can make it a religion almost, I can imagine, right?
100%,
like,
100%.
Yeah. Or like this game that you're trying to master.
Yeah. So do you have any questions? Because if not, I would like to talk about the love astrology of 2022 and give people an opportunity to ask questions. And, if this has stimulated any questions in you, feel free to put it in the chat box, like Sarika said, and I'll be happy to take a look at it for you.
Yeah, I have a quick question. What's the difference between Vedic astrology and Western astrology?
Well, Yeah, one is focused on the sun, one is focused on the moon. That's the main basic
Mhm,
difference, right? So, and all there are a few other things, but the method of calculation is different because of
mhm.
that. And actually, Vedic astrology follows the current constellations because it's centered around the moon, and the Western astrology or sidereal astrology is because it follows the sun. It's almost, you may have heard how there's, oh, the constellations have changed, and like we're it's not the same anymore. We're not under the stars that we think we are. Like Aries is really Taurus, and there are 13 constellations. Like people get into a lot of confusion about it. But what I found, and I mean, I have only started studying Vedic, so I'm like very brand new to it. But what I've found with the Vedic readings I've gotten and the Western readings I've gotten, they have different flavors to it for sure, but they're essentially giving me the same messages. It's interesting, right? When you think about that, because I'm having a Saturn influence under both of those systems, right? And then like the inclinations from my Western chart, like whenever I've gotten my Western astrology chart read, they've told me the same things as my Vedic astrologers, where it's like, oh, there's potential for shamanism, tantra, yoga, astrology, all these things in your chart, which again is the same thing in Vedic astrology. Or your focus is profession and being out in the world, same in Vedic astrology. So I'll let you know after I study for like a bunch of more years Vedic astrology, how that actually works. Because right now I have a question about it myself. But yeah, the main difference is one is solar, one is lunar.
Got it. Okay. That was so helpful. And I just found your reading to be so enlightening. And so, yeah, thank you.
Cool. So should we talk about what's coming
Yes.
in
What can we
2022?
expect in 2022? And
Yeah.
I'm curious, like astrologically, what did 2020 and 2021 represent?
Oh my God.
And especially in terms of love and relationship, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so 2020 was 2020 and 2021 really, but more of 2020 than 2021. It was very Saturnian, right?
Oh my goodness.
And
Yes.
2021 was very Saturn and Pluto. Like,
Got
so
it.
we had both those influences. So just as a big overview, and then we had like tons of retrogrades, which we have every year. We have retrogrades and things like that, but just the way things aligned, right? Then we had Jupiter and Saturn together. There was that big conjunction that everyone was talking about last year. I'm saying last year, it was this year, but oh my God, time. I feel like 2020 was a decade, that's what it felt like to me. Anyway, so 2020 had a very Saturnian feel to it, and if you look at it in just, even if we take out astrology, which I never do, but if we take out astrology, if we look at the themes that emerged in relationships, right? People were forced to be together, right? Because of the lockdown. Everyone, like I have friends who had to spend 24 hours with their partners because they're in these tiny little New York apartments and they have nowhere else to go. They have to work there, they have to see each other all the time. And it was a lot, right? So that's Saturn. Saturn is like confinement, Saturn is restriction and kind of like pressure cooker, So I
Is it also
feel,
related to the root chakra at all? Because I was thinking that 2020 also felt like a root chakra year where you're like stuck at home,
yeah,
family,
Saturn
resolving
has,
relationships. Hmm.
yeah, Saturn has a connection to the root chakra for sure.
Hmm.
So, because it's about the material world and it's
Hmm.
about being here. It's about our tribal relationships. The root
Hmm.
chakra I'm talking about now. It's about our family relationships, our relationships to the earth, right?
Hmm.
So I would say, like, just as a very general overview, 2020 was very Saturnian, bringing people into a place in relationships where they really had to evaluate whether they belonged together, because I know lots of couples who broke up, and I also know lots of couples who got even more committed. That was the vibe, of 2020, even 2021, but even more so 2020. 2021, we had more of a social focus, and then it became about like, can we be in a relationship with somebody? Because I encountered this in my clients, my friends, and close people. Can we be in a relationship with somebody that we have different values, different beliefs, different philosophies, all that with, can we? Can we choose
That
to
was our
find?
question, my husband and I question this year, because we just
Yeah,
had two different perspectives
on what was going
on
on.
what was going on. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're not the only person.
Right.
I've spoken to so many people who had that experience with their spouses or their boyfriends or girlfriends, where it was like, can I be with somebody who thinks completely differently from me, And if so, then like, how do we manage that? That was 2021, where can we agree to disagree? Where can we let each other be who they are? How much capacity do we have to rise above what we think is right, and be in relationship to others? And we're still carrying that theme on. It's not gone. People are still working it out. I know people who are still, in their relationships working it out. And that's kind of a spiritual test. That's Saturn for you, But we did have a lot of Jupiterian influence this year to kind of expand our worldview, So when we end up being in a place with somebody who we love very dearly, where we're looking at things differently, we have to expand our worldview. We don't have a choice. And that's for both parties. Otherwise, it's not going to work, So those were the challenges relationship wise that we were.
Totally. It was such a growth year. I mean, I learned that conflict is growth waiting to happen. I learned about polarity and the power of it, And how do you love outside of trying to be right? I think that's a big one. That was like completely ego shattering in a way, or it helps dismantle. Yeah. And what about for single people? What do you think 2020 and 2021 represent?
Well, as a single person,
Yep.
throughout 2020 and 2021, I can tell you, it just became a lot clearer what I want in a relationship, and what I will accept and what I won't, and what kind of person I would like to be with.
Yeah.
So, and I got to really see if I was as happy as I thought I was with myself. Luckily for me, the answer was yes, So I've had a pretty nice love affair with myself in the last couple of years. So I would say for single people, it's been like that. And then there were times when I asked the question of like, well, how do you even navigate a relationship in such a time, because first of all, you come in and you're like, well, do they have the same perspective as me? If they don't, then what? It's much trickier to date now than it ever has been, like I just feel like we've been dealt a bunch of cards to look at. And I think ultimately the solution for me, at least the way I've looked at it, is not to get identified with any perspective, any belief, any point of view, because that's not who we are. It's just our mind that's given the importance to that. And if we do that, then we can come at any relationship and be able to communicate, Doesn't mean that it needs to be someone who you end up being intimate with, but at least you have an open mind. You're not closed off just because then it's a judgment. So
I really love that. I think that's so powerful. And from what I've seen is that if you use 2020, 2021 as like waking up years, in the sense of looking at your karma, looking at your relationships, significant relationships with your family, yourself, then 2022, I would imagine is going to be a year of growth and expansion,
even more
exactly.
More.
And so I think it's been a powerful 2 years from a karmic healing perspective. Absolutely. And just coming home into our bodies and to ourselves.
And getting really acquainted with the fear of death.
Yes, that's a very powerful initiation. I feel like we went through this initiation.
I think all of us to some extent or the other have been going through it, right? And that's where yoga has helped me a lot. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I'm a huge fan of Sadhguru.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a huge fan of like non-duality teachings. I have another teacher who's
Mm-hmm.
who I listened to and followed throughout the lockdown. In fact, I went to Italy to visit her as well
Mm-hmm.
this past summer, and all that was really helpful. You know,
Mm-hmm.
where I mean, death is it's inevitable,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and here we come face to face with it,
Mm-hmm.
and we realize just how disassociated we are from the truth, not even the
Mm-hmm.
concept. It's a truth,
Mm-hmm.
right? From the inevitability of death, we're like completely like, you know, and that can trigger a whole host of other things. But we're talking about relationships, not death. So,
Well, it's the same. Once I meditated on what it would be like to see my partner die, it
Mhm.
made me love him even more.
Mhm.
Like it makes you cherish your life even more, not from a clinging perspective, but more
Sure.
from like what you really love and value, and
Yeah.
how you choose to
Yeah.
show up
It's
with
been
your
it's
loved
been
ones.
it's been 2 years of very deep loss for people on
Yes.
multiple levels. You know, I've lost really close friends. I've lost family members, not just to COVID, you know,
Right.
just people are leaving, you know, and
Right.
that's just what happens. It's just, it feels like there's more poignancy around it now
Yeah.
because of
And
what we've
And are we like ending an era, astrological era? Is it like ending of Kali Yuga and beginning of Aquarian? Is
So,
that,
so it's fun that you asked that, because there
yeah.
is absolutely no consensus in the astrology
Okay.
world,
I was wondering about
either
that.
Vedic or Western, as
Wow.
to when it starts. Some people say it started way back when. Some are like, it's still happening. It's going to continue for another 100,000, 200,000 years. So there's zero consensus about it. So I guess we find out when it actually happens. To me, it really feels very apocalyptic still, you
Yeah.
know. I do feel like we're apocalyptic and shifting, you
Hmm.
know, but that's my perspective. So to dive into what's coming up astrologically in 2022,
Hmm.
we'll start with the Venus retrograde, because it started December 19th and it's directly connected to our topic, which is love and relationships. So Venus is currently retrograde right now in the sign of Capricorn, according to the Western zodiac.
And how long will it be in retrograde?
It's going to finish on my birthday, January 29th.
Ooh.
I
Okay.
know. And Capricorn is also the sign that my Venus is in. So yeah, so when Venus goes retrograde, Venus is the morning star and the evening star, right? But when Venus goes retrograde, Venus doesn't appear as the morning star anymore. It goes in the shadow, right? So you literally can't see it in the morning, right? So it started on December 19th, Venus went retrograde. And the most significant planetary alignment under the Venus retrograde is Venus is conjunct, as in together with Pluto at certain points during this retrograde. So now Venus represents love, relationships, money, resources, right? All of that. And then you have Pluto represents transformation, death, rebirth, occult, mysticism, you know, all that. So you put those two planets together, just like in an individual chart, if those two planets are communicating with each other, the themes are going to be present of like relationship equals transformation, right? Just like that, if we look at this Venus retrograde, the theme of this Venus retrograde is bringing out collectively a desire for us to have deeper relationships, you know, and using relationships as a catalyst, right? Which we're doing globally with each other. And then again, like depending on where it falls in your chart, it's going to be more personal, right? Or less personal. Some people are not going to feel it as strongly as others, because it's not every planet is going to affect everybody all the time, you know, because then we would go crazy. You need a break sometimes. but yeah, so we're dealing with Venus and Pluto. That's the theme of this retrograde, right? And then we have this beautiful thing, which doesn't always happen during a Venus retrograde. It happens, but not always in the same way. So on January 8th, Venus is going to make a conjunction to the sun because it's going to be in the same sign and very close in degree to the sun. So it's like Venus is finally starting to come out of her shadows and she's like peeking out. So that is called a rebirth of Venus, right? So she's ready to like shed the old and come out with the new. Now, because it's in the sign of Capricorn and Pluto is also in the sign of Capricorn, and then the sun is going to be in Capricorn, it has a Capricornian flavor to it. And the ruler of Capricorn is Saturn, right? The Capricornian flavor to it is we're not just concerned with relationships on a, excuse me, we're not just concerned with relationships on a love level, which is what it would be if it was Libra or Pisces, it would be all about just the heart and the love. But in Capricorn, we mean business. Capricorn is a very ambitious sign. It's a sign that likes productivity. It likes to create things. It likes to create structures, right? So we have that. And then we have the other stuff going on where Uranus has been making several aspects and is going to be making an aspect in 2022 where it's going to shatter those structures. So we've had a lot of shattering of structures happening, right? So even though Venus and Pluto coming together and in Capricorn is going to want to make us build, we're like trying to build new structures, both in our relationships. We're like kind of, okay, this is how it broke down. We see we've been through it. Did we survive it? And can we build something new? And then there is just off with the old completely. That's the Uranian vibe, just like, let's leave it behind. It's too much, right? For us to drag it with us into the new year. So that's Venus retrograde and starts us off into the new year. We also have the eclipses that are going to be happening this year is going to be in the signs of Taurus and Scorpio. And those two signs are, it's part of a relationship axis, right? Because you have Taurus ruled by Venus, and then you have Scorpio ruled by Pluto. And Scorpio is all about our sexuality. It's about our intimacy. It's where we go really deep, and in those two signs, we're looking at relationship wise, we're looking at like really how to release karma. We're looking at how to rise above our karmic entanglement, because that's what these two signs want us to do. And the north and south node are also going to move in Taurus and Scorpio. So it's related to why the eclipses are going to be in those signs. So both the solar and lunar eclipses are going to be in those signs. And then they're going to finish the cycles that we started this year. So we just had a round of eclipses, right? November and December, we just had a round of eclipses that are going to come to a completion in April, May, and then we start a new cycle in October and November, and they're still in the same sign. It's again going to be Scorpio Taurus, right? So we're getting hit with this energy of shared resources also, because we have Taurus there. Taurus represents our resources, right? And Scorpio represents shared resources. So how we share our resources in partnerships is going to come into play. And with like practical Venus shoving us into the new year in Capricorn, right? Practical Venus in Capricorn, we're going to be asked to look at how we can come together in a way that works for our resources. We're not going to be able to separate our resources from our love lives, right? So I would say, again, depending on the individual, it's going to depend on where it falls in their chart as to how it activates in their chart and for them personally. But I would say, generally speaking, we want to be really careful who we invite into our sacred pool, into our sacred circle. And we want to be really careful when we make those commitments, because Taurus and Scorpio like to commit. They're very committed signs, right? And also Venus retrograde with the Pluto is going to make us want more stability, right? But we want to ask the question, is it smart to do it with this person, right? And because there's a lot of entanglement that can happen, right? Then there are a couple of other, we have a couple of other influences, like Mercury is going to do the retrograde things. You know, the first Mercury retrograde is January 14th. So it's going to be in the sign of Capricorn and Aquarius. So that should be fun. You know, Mercury retrograde is always fun, right? The big theme, though, there's one big overall theme of 2022 is Jupiter moving into the sign of Pisces, right? And Jupiter, when it moves into the sign of Pisces, is also going to make a conjunction to Neptune. Jupiter and Neptune together in Pisces is significant for a number of reasons. Number one, Neptune is considered to be the higher octave of Venus, right? So if Venus is personal love, Neptune is divine love, transcendental love. That's why if we look at a chart, we look at what Neptune is doing if we want to look at soulmate type connections, right? Not just Venus, we want to look at Neptune. And Jupiter in Pisces is significant, and Neptune is the original ruler of Pisces. So it's very comfortable there. It's been there for a while, but it's very comfortable in that sign. And then Jupiter in Pisces is significant because before Neptune was discovered, Jupiter was the ruler of Pisces. So Jupiter also likes to be in Pisces, right? And then we have the archetypes of these planets, which is expansion, spirituality, right? Transcendence and transcendental love. And those two planets coming together, there's a huge influx of spiritual energy coming into the planet. And that's in April of next year. And as that happens, we're going to naturally see, in terms of relationships, we're going to see people either coming together or, you know, going their separate ways, because there's going to be more of a focus on a spiritually sound relationship. Does that make sense?
Oh my goodness. And that's totally what I'm preparing my clients for, you know, and I'm so excited to hear that. Yeah, that transcendental love, and that divine love, which I know so many women seek. They seek partnership, but they also seek that divine union relationship.
Absolutely.
You know, and first you have to create that within yourself, which is, you know, what you've talked about, and then, you know, harnessing the energies of 2022 for that, but then also being clear about not getting entangled with the wrong type of person. It sounds like there's either a downward spiral possible or an upward spiral possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's key, is like either you could be choosing like a fear-based, you know, kind of downward cycle, or you could be choosing a love-based upward cycle, you know, so you have to be very intentional.
Totally. And also be really aware and awake, because even though Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces and together is a beautiful spiritual vibration, Pisces and Neptune are known for the dual side of it is illusions and delusions. We can get really lost, you know, we can imagine things, you know, we can create these whole worlds. So we think, oh, we found the absolute perfect person, but we idolize them because we wear rose-colored glasses. That's what Neptune is best known for. Pisces is best known for that, rose-colored glasses, right? And you actually don't want to look at the warning signs. So then you have the eclipses, and you have Venus giving you the warning, like, make sure you do look at the warning signs, you know, just because it feels like, wow, doesn't mean you just check out, you know. And so just be really aware and consciously build a relationship, you know, and take your time, because Taurus likes to take their time. Taurus is a very patient sign, you know, it's the most patient sign. It's an earth sign. And, you know, the influence of the Taurus eclipses are going to be good for us in that way, because it's going to ask us for staying power over like temporary pleasure. Yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting and positive as well. You know, I mean, it could be difficult for some people who haven't, you know, who have a lot of unresolved issues, I would imagine. But if you're committed to doing that, you know, doing the healing work, and that's what I would love for you to share next. And you know, that's kind of what I desire for my clients to do, is to just feel lighter and lighter within themselves, healing those patterns, so that when they are dating and finding a partnership, they can make the right choices. Like they're really connected to their intuition and seeing the red flags and aligning on values and
Yeah.
choosing the right partnership. Right.
Well, in terms of the healing work, I know we're a little over time, so I'll keep
Yeah.
it brief. But in terms of the healing work, I would say if astrology is about identifying those patterns that we
Mm-hmm.
have that first of all we come in with, so we can work with them, and that's what we're here to heal. And also just karmically, those are our lessons, right? So if astrology is about identifying the patterns that are keeping us from experiencing that relationship, which would be transcendental or like a really conscious soulmate relationship that helps us grow and evolve in a healthy way, right? Then the healing work is about working with those patterns in a way that you're able to rise above them. That's what the healing work is about, right? So, like I said, it's done one-on-one, either in person or over the phone. And we really look at how we're holding those patterns, right? So we use the physical body, because the physical body, and here's a little bit of yoga, is not separate from our energy body, our pranic body, our bliss body, our mental, emotional bodies. They're all like Russian dolls, right? But they're all connected. So the physical body is going to reflect our mental, emotional states. It's going to reflect our mental, emotional patterns, right? And then we're saying, oh, we're touching here, right? But we're not just touching here. When we touch here, we're diving into the deeper energetic layer of it, right? And then how is it holding? So the reason my teacher called it movements of light is because everything that's a turning away from the light of God appears as a contraction, appears as a karmic pattern, and is where we get stuck and twisted and distorted. So if we can bring those patterns into awareness and we can acknowledge what they're there to teach us, then we learn how to release them. And
So
that
I
can,
would imagine that also includes physical symptoms like diseases or.
yeah. So
Mhm.
the medical profession very clearly tells us that we don't treat diseases because we are doing spiritual healing. So that's my little
I see.
disclaimer.
Okay.
But we call them physical imbalances, you know, so
Hmm.
your symptoms are really physical imbalances, right? So for example, I had COVID back in December of last year, right? And when I had it, you know, it was such an interesting experience because it brought up all this emotional stuff that was under the surface, right? And I was like riding that emotional wave for a good 2-3 weeks, you know. And once I was done with it, because, you know, the virus worked itself through my body and I developed the immune system for it, I fought it off. Post COVID, I felt like 100 times lighter. And I had one woman in one of my group workshops come last year who said that she nearly died from COVID. Like she was in the hospital, she had the pneumonia, her heart nearly shut down. So it was like a near-death experience. She said it was the most spiritual experience she's ever had in her life because it changed the trajectory of which direction she was going in because it brought up so much, you know. So yes, to answer your questions, like our physical body and whatever imbalances it's experiencing, symptoms, imbalances, like even though we don't treat symptoms, right? But we treat the whole human being, you know, we're working at the level of consciousness. And when we do that, then naturally it seems that people experience relief from their physical imbalances. You know, it's a natural result, but that's not what we're treating. Like we're not going in there to be like, okay, I'm gonna, you know, of course, with certain exceptions when people specifically ask for it, right? They specifically ask for, well, this is something that's coming up and I've tried absolutely everything. I've been to every doctor possible. Now I'm just ready to try something else. Just focus on this, nothing else, you know? And even then there's going to be those layers that come up, you know? In terms of relationships, because that's our theme, it's interesting, right? Because she's a friend and a client. And the first time I worked on her, what came up was all this stuff she was still holding about her ex, right? And it was almost like their energy body, like his energy body was still entangled with hers. right? And it had not been long that they had broken up, maybe like a few months. And, it's natural for that process to occur. And she was experiencing like this bout of like psoriasis that she had never had before. So as we worked on it, like she released a lot. And interestingly enough, her psoriasis subsided in a few days after our session. And she was really amazed by that, because she was like, wow, I got to see directly the connection to my emotional state and my physicality, because most people are cut off from those two things being connected together, So that's why I like this work a lot, because where astrology can help identify those patterns, and you can kind of learn what you're working with, then you have this other tool that can help you work through them, really break through them, in some ways, and it's kind of tricky to say that in some ways you're working with your karmic patterns in a way that you're rising above them. But that's dependent on the person and their level of evolution as to whether or not it sticks. That's the other thing, because if you're not done with the pattern, because I'm not a guru, I'm not a master, right? Only gurus and masters have the capacity to eradicate karma on our behalf. But if somebody has grown to a point where they just need a little assistance in releasing that pattern, then yes, it will work and it will stay that way, because now they have a new reference point. If not, then it can go back, maybe not in the same intensity, and they'll experience similar things again, but maybe not in the same intensity. So, really depends on the individual over there.
Wow, this is just so enlightening. Thank you so much, Lubaina. And I love this combination of work that you're doing, astrology and light body healing. I'm sorry, it's called light.
Movements of light.
It's movements of light. Yeah, movements of light.
In progress.
Yeah, movements of light.
Yeah.
I think those are really powerful, and just the understanding of the body. And so I appreciate you coming on air today to teach us about astrology and love. And it seems like we have a lot to look forward to and a lot of great tools at our disposal.
Totally. So it looks like no one had any questions.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? And so just tell us where we can find you. What's your website?
I'm actually going to type it into the chat box as well. So that way it's.
Yeah. And I'll be sending this out to everyone.
Yeah. So that's my website.
Okay.
My Instagram handle is just my full name.
Yeah.
And you can find me on Facebook as well. There we go.
Awesome.
Thank you, Wendy, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Take care. I'm going to end the recording now. Or I think you can end the recording.
Oh, yeah, I can. Well, thank you, Sarika, for having me. It was such a pleasure.
Yeah.